Success isn't a map you can follow.
It starts with a spark of curiosity for the unknown, dedication for the unlearned,
and innovation to pave the way for the next generation of leaders. These are the makings of our entrepreneurs who are redefining this industry by bringing the real in real estate. Real people, real experiences,
real excellence.
Welcome to the Real Relentless podcast by Century 21 Tri-Cities, a real estate brokerage in Eastern Washington. On this episode, we're talking to Vicki Monteagudo, the woman who envisioned Century 21 Tri-Cities and built a wildly successful brokerage with a very unique style. Some may say she's changing the face of real estate, but she'd likely tell you she's just building a place of diverse inclusivity that she's extremely proud of.
Hi, I'm Vicki Monteagudo, the owner and designated broker here at Century 21 Tri-Cities.
What first got you interested in real estate?
So we talked about the entrepreneur side of real estate and what kind of got me into the business. But when I was in college, I actually had taken a business law class. And then for the first time ever, that professor also had put on a real estate course, and I signed up for it. And I loved it. I love where I could blend the business law aspect of it and contracts. And then I had also emphasized in marketing. And so what more than beautiful to bridge sales, marketing, and business law together.
Were you originally going to go into marketing?
Yeah, just marketing, advertising, and then general business. And then when I started learning more about contractual law and things like that, I really enjoy that part.
What made you want to start your own brokerage?
Okay, so I was an agent for 11 years, and then I was almost running a brokerage within a brokerage, which meant I had my own listing coordinator, my own transaction coordinator, and then I had started hiring in graphic designers because we had represented over, I think at that time, 7 builders and a number of developers. And so I knew what it took to get to the next level as far as doing the amount of transaction volume that we were doing. And so it just made kind of perfect sense to take that next step.
What made you choose Century 21 over possibly creating your own agency?
Oh, that's a fantastic question because so I was with a national company at that time, and so I knew how national franchises worked. And you're absolutely right. The fork in the road to go indie versus franchise, it became a no-brainer once I met with one of our local TV stations. Every year they do the Nielsen ratings, and I'm looking through the Nielsen ratings to look at like all the competition, and Century 21 pops up, and I'm like, why do they already have 7% top of mind market share when they're not even in this market? And so then I was looking into it. I was like, well, yeah, because they're a national or international company. There's a lot of market awareness about it. They've been around since 1971. And I was thinking, well, that would be an easier platform to build on than starting entirely from scratch. Plus, I think we can all agree in Tri-Cities, we all love our franchises. Anything from Olive Gardens to Applebee's. We just have this great affinity to knowing what the process is and what to expect. And all of them tend to do pretty well here locally. So it seemed like a good choice.
Was there ever a moment you felt like this might not work out?
Well, it's funny when you get your heart set on something and you've got that entrepreneurial fire in your belly. Sometimes you put on these blinders and you forget the things that you might be leaving behind or the things that you might be risking. And that's a true entrepreneur, right? Somebody that's just like, okay, with all else fails, we're going to make this work. And because I had a non-compete, so I couldn't bring any of my builder accounts. I couldn't bring any of our developer accounts. I couldn't bring anybody that I was working with to the new company. And so what it really taught me was I had to start from scratch. And I think that's the biggest lesson learned, the biggest testament that I was able to do that. Looking back, I was thinking, Wow, that was pretty crazy. What were you thinking? But when you're just going forward and you're like, well, we're just doing this. You just grind it and do it. And then there's new opportunities that open. And I always say, at least in my life, for every one door that closes, two tend to open themselves up. And so that's kind of how I live my life.
Looking back, is there anything else that you think you would have done differently?
I am glad looking back that I didn't go indie, because there was conversations, right, within myself, like, do we call it Monteagudo Realty? Do we call it Three Rivers Realty? There's all these names that you're like thinking, well, what if we go that path? I am so glad that we, made the decision of going franchise, because at the end of the day, one of the big root things that I had thought about is, especially with the Monteagudo Realty idea, was that's great when it's just yourself that's selling. But the one thing I thought was, well, when you are bringing on other agent partners, how would they feel to then be working, let's say, beneath Monteagudo Realty, my name versus their own name? So I just feel like with Century 21, they're able to create their own identity. An optimist by default, by nature. So Lisa says, you have the pleasure of dumping anything negative in your life. And I don't remember negative things. Like, I try to just keep moving forward, learning the lesson that was supposed to present itself, but not dwell on it. Yeah, I'm not a big dweller. It's not like vendetta. It's like, okay, we'll just move through it. That happened, now what? My father was Filipino, and him and my mother met in California, and she was from Kennewick, and he always said that, I love the United States, but that's the one thing that a lot of people are always overly stressed.
Does Century 21 Corporate give you a lot of freedom with autonomy?
Oh, very much so. So a real estate branch or franchises are so different than, let's say, owning a McDonald's. Obviously they're very handbook and regimented, and this is the process, this is the flow. What I do love about Century 21, and it being an international company, they realize different geographic markets drive different decision making, and then you've got the different layers of contractual law in each of the states. So it's nice that I can go to corporate with an idea or concept and get their blessing, and they're 100% behind us.
Can you give us an example of what your daily schedule was like during those first few months of starting your own business?
Oh boy. Okay. So I had to start over. I only had one agent that had started with the company, and that was, we started effectively January 2nd in 2012. And so I got back to the basics. And I talk about this all the time with the agents. Like, at the end of the day, the old school things work, and you just get back to the basics. And so what I did was I got back to selling. And so that means I was doing all agent duties at that time, because now at that point I had a commercial mortgage because I had bought a commercial office space. And so there was no room of, oh, well, we'll give this a shot or we'll give this a try. No, you're 2 feet into it and you've got to grind it out. So I started with that. Then like, for example, Titan Homes, Aaron Sullivan called me, and I remember this very vividly. It was a Saturday, and he said, hey, you had talked to me before, and you were really honest and candid with me that you couldn't take on my building account because you were too busy, and I really respect that, but I heard that you started your own company, and I'd like to connect. So, it's just doing a good job in your market, and then making sure you just keep pushing forward and follow through and do what you say and doing all the good things.
So how did you measure success in the beginning?
I don't count agent count. I know with a lot of brokerages, they're like, oh, we've got 80 agents or 114 agents. And that's not my biggest, that's not what I focus on. I focus on per agent development, career development, and per agent productivity. And so Century 21 has an award called the Per Agent Productivity Award. And I focus more on that because at that point, what it shows is you've got career professionals. I may have less agents than other brokerages, but we actually have career focused agents that are specialists at what they do. And so when other brokerages are maybe doing an average of average agent's doing 3 transactions a year, but our agents are doing an average of 17 and beyond. That's where I feel like that coaching pride, and that they're all making good livings of doing what they're doing.
So Century 21 Tri-Cities, they offer a lot of back-end support. Is that typical of Century 21 overall, or is that unique?
It's actually not typical for any brokerage. So corporate, because we talk very, very often, in fact, I had a corporate call this morning, they always tell me, you guys are like a large boutique office. And so where all of how this company has been set up was from my own personal sales volume as an agent. I knew what I needed help with to get to the levels that I was at. So at one point in my career, I sold 173 properties in 1 year, but I also know that you have to have a certain process flow to get to that level. And so that's where you have a transaction coordinator, and a listing coordinator, and a graphics department, and you have all these things because people need people time. And if you're stuck at the office creating a flyer and you don't do it as often and it takes you 3 hours, there's not efficiencies in that. So that's why I've always said, I've surrounded myself, I think, with the best team, because it allows myself or the agents to really focus on what they're doing, and that's networking, their contract flow, and things of that nature. So really, all I did was replicate what I had before as an agent that I saw immense value in, and then just brought it here to the brokerage so other agents could benefit from it.
Do you think corporate sees what you're doing and may implement it in the future?
Well, they recognize that every brokerage and location's different, but they have had me do guest speaking. We had one leadership event in the Bahamas and some of these other places to at least give my perspective on how we run the companies, and then maybe other brokers can glean on some of those ideas. Yeah. And I did another talk at Inman Connect down in San Francisco, and so it's fun to at least pay forward. And I always say that about anything in our lives. You can't necessarily always pay back the people that got you to where you are today, but you can certainly pay forward and maybe teach or bring education to those that are just getting started, or even the ones that have been around for a while.
We have to ask, so did you make a big purchase with your first big paycheck?
I think anybody that knows me is I'm pretty thrifty when it comes to personal stuff. And so when I first got started, they called me Philo, first in, last out in the office. So I was just always working, right? But I love it. I love the people that I meet, and I love vicariously living through people and their experiences, because I'm not a huge traveler or anything, but almost to a default, and I still do this today, is just the reinvestment into our company. So back then it was, got a check. I'm going to buy 1,000 business cards, or I'm going to buy, and I self-created my own logo at a publisher. And so then I'd create, I'd buy coffee mugs for advertising, or I'd made gift bags, or big, I don't know if you remember, banking envelopes so that they could put their closing paperwork in it, and pens. And so I grossly reinvest in the company, and I do the same thing now with reinvestment in our staffing, our people. Of course, we built the building 5 years ago, because I believe that real estate transaction, it's an experience all the way through, not just from engagement open house, but office presence. We're one of the few brokerages that actually own our real estate. Most lease their space, and I think that's a huge testament to what we do as an industry. If we're telling everybody else that they should invest in real estate, to me it's kind of interesting that most real estate companies don't.
What would you say is the biggest risk you've taken since opening Century 21?
Oh yeah, I know one that sticks out. It's not an issue now, but it was when we first launched it. So Century 21 Tri-Cities has the Certified Pre-Owned Property Program. And, I'm a logistics person. So I was thinking, gosh, every seller that we have first puts their property on the market, and then offer comes in. Let's say we sign around that offer and we're negotiated through price and terms. And then within 10 days, that buyer has the option to give them a laundry list of things that they need to repair with their home, or they can back out of the contract and get their earnest money back. And it got me to thinking, well, the car industry doesn't do it that way. The car industry, you don't get to put a car under contract, drive it for 10 days, and then return it for one reason or another. And what they have is Carfax report. And so I thought, okay, maybe we're just not approaching this the right way. We need to inspect the properties. We still need to do that function because there are latent defects that none of us may be aware of. And so I just re-engineered the process. Instead of getting the house under contract and then burdening the buyer with paying for a home inspection and then revealing those items and then trying to negotiate those through, especially in a market where it's hard to get subcontractors to come in quickly or giving good bids, it's reversing it where we do the inspection up front. The seller then sees all the things that are right or wrong with their property. Then they identify what they should do with the property. So let's say that's a failed roof. Then they have the time to have the roof replaced. And then them and the agent can figure out, well, now that it has a brand new roof, does that help with value? And then price the home according to the new repairs that they've made. And then come to the market where the buyer can see everything that's right or wrong with the property. And then they can negotiate through, but then that seller is not being negotiated twice. They're only negotiating one. So in the beginning, that was risky because as an industry, we're very, that's not how we always do our deals. Well, now a lot of agents now see the benefits. Like, well, the deals are smoother because we know up front what's right or wrong with the property. And we're not later finding out during the transaction.
Was there ever a point in the beginning of your career where you felt or knew that you were breaking the glass ceiling?
Anybody that knows me, I'm super humble. Sometimes I put everything out there too much just because, that's just who I am. That's who I am 100% of the time. I'm not like one way at work and one way at the office versus at home. Like who everybody gets is who everybody gets. I always say I'm too busy to tell two stories. Like have one story and then tell another story. Like it is what it is. So I'm very humble. As far as the glass ceiling, I guess I've kind of been in the midst of that for a long time because I, cut my teeth in new construction with development. And most of those, even today, for the most part, are very male-dominated industries. And I guess I was just always raised with the mantra of, everybody puts their pants on the same way. We all zip them in the front, and it is what it is. And so I guess it doesn't matter, and I tell the agents this too, it doesn't matter if you're selling somebody's cottage or castle. Everybody has a story, and sometimes, and homes really reveal stature and sacrifice. So that's, I think, as far as breaking the glass ceiling, I think everybody's doing that every day.
What are you most proud of?
It's true. That it is. I always say Century 21 has been my first baby. I have two babies now, 5 and 6 years old. Oh, 5 and 7 years old, but still in Claire. But I'm just proud of the reputation that we have in our area and abroad. We're number one in the state of Washington, but I'm really proud of our agents. I'm really proud of the reputation that we have in our community. And I always say that, regardless of all the marketing and advertising and branding that you do, if you don't have a good reputation, you don't have anything. And that all goes out the window. So everything has to match, and your follow-through has to match, and your customer care has to match. But that's what I'm most proud of, is all the partners here at the office and the job that they do every single day.
People see you and they see this polished businesswoman who is a natural leader and entrepreneur, yet I've heard you grew up working on cars and derby racing. So is there anything else that people might not know about you that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I think that I think you said it right, because people only see the end product, right? And so then there's perceptions of how that end product ended up. And the same with a lot of our top performing agents. But I think all of us are like onions. When you get to know us and you start peeling that onion, you find out there's just so much more depth and grit and sacrifice and know-how and willing to learn and willing to grow. And so, I think that my diverse background growing up, everything from the agricultural side, from moving hand lines in the summer at my grandma's farm, or buying things at an auction on Tuesday nights on a school night to then take them out to my parents' restaurant and tavern in Altopia to then sell them to all of the seasonal workers, or to our parents being really strict and making us getting, straight A's in school and having that expectation. And even when I had undiagnosed asthma, saying, hey, you got to step it up. And at that point we didn't have inhalers and stuff like that. And so being able to just work through it and that's what I always say. I'm maybe not always not the most naturally or gifted, smartest person, but I'm willing to put in the work and I'm willing to do what it takes to get the job done and see it through. But yeah, it's just work ethic, I think, comes down to it, and the willing to really just focus in and learn it and get through it.
That's the end of our talk with Vicki Monteagudo. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we look forward to sharing even more creative topics in the future.